Hi everybody, and welcome back to another watercolor lab. Today we're going to talk about brush care. You know, brushes are one of your largest investments in watercolor. Good brushes are expensive, but any brush can benefit from proper care. So let's take a look at what you can do to help your brushes perform their best and last their longest. Okay, here are the major parts of any brush. The tip, especially important in watercolor because of adding detail without having to pick up another brush. The belly of the brush holds the amount of pigment and water that gets dispensed as you paint. The ferrule fastens the bristles to the handle, and we know the handles are usually made of wood or sometimes plastic. The brush hairs themselves fall into three generic categories. There's natural bristle, there's synthetics, and then there's a blend of natural and synthetic. All of these bristle types will benefit from what we're talking about today. When we paint, we load the brush up with pigment and water, and most of that gets dispensed onto the paper we're painting on. However, a lot of it stays in the brush, especially in the hairs up close to the opening of the ferrule. If this paint is allowed to dry and accumulate, it can cause problems for the brush. And so it's important to rinse it out properly. But brushes can easily become oversubmerged or, worse yet, left to soak in the water. This can damage a brush in several ways. First, water can get in the bristle end of the brush and loosen the bristles so they fall out. Secondly, it can enter the other end of the ferrule by the handle, and slowly wood will soak up the water and expand. This can cause a cracking of the lacquer coating that is found on many wooden handles. And these little chips of lacquer will fall off into paintings, and if left soaking long enough, the wood handle can actually split. The other thing that happens is on some brushes it will stretch the ferrule, and the handle then becomes loose, and the brush is difficult to paint with or comes apart completely, very difficult to repair. So it's important to clean the brush properly. How can we best do this? Well, there are soaps that are made exactly for this purpose. Two of the best that I've found are the Masters Brush Cleaner and Preserver, which comes in a cake form like this, and the other one is a Speedball product called Pink Soap, and it comes as a liquid in a bottle like this. And both of these soaps work quite well to clean brushes. Now if we take a brush that has paint in it and we rinse it as we normally would, just in water, you can see that a lot of pigment goes into that water. Now the brush paints with no color if we lay down water on paper. But the question is there pigment left in the brush? So taking a couple drops of soap, and really a couple drops is all it takes. I like to clean brushes in the palm of my hand. I can feel what the bristles are doing. This happens to be a number 6 round brush, but for any brush close to this size, a couple drops of soap is all it takes. You can see that the foam from the soap is turning green by pulling pigment out of the brush. Soap works a lot harder than just plain water when it comes to removing pigment from a brush. Some people might be thinking that the reason the lather turned green is because the water is so green. But again, when we dip that brush we just cleaned in the water, it paints clear. Now, let's take a couple more drops of soap, and if the brush is pulling pigment from the water, it'll turn the foam green again. But if not, we know that we were removing pigment that was left in the brush from when we had the paint in it. This foam is coming out pretty white, indicating that the brush was cleaned the first time we used soap on it. And that's as it should be. It should only take one washing to clean the brush. After rinsing the brush in running water, I like to blot it out on a paper towel just to keep a sharp point on it. But the real question is, how should you dry a wet brush? There are a couple things you really want to avoid. First, never put a wet brush vertically into a container. While it's okay to store dry brushes this way, a wet brush just allows water to run up into the ferrule, loosening the bristles. And never store a wet brush bristle down, or you end up with this. They make products like this wire brush holder, and these can be handy to dry a brush in, but are pretty, clunky and awkward around the studio, and certainly if you're doing plein air painting, you wouldn't want to necessarily lug one of these along. Another popular way to carry a brush is with a canvas roll-up, but putting a wet brush inside one of these can severely misshape the bristles as they dry. It turns out the best solution is also the simplest. Simply set the brush down flat on something absorbent like a paper towel and let it dry out. This will keep stress off of the brush hairs, and it will prevent water from draining where it shouldn't be. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you found something useful in this information, and we'll see you next time on Watercolor Lab. Bye for now.